Good evening everyone, and welcome to Council Cabinet this evening, Wednesday the 17th of January, first one of the new year, so welcome everybody and thank you for your attendance. We'll begin with apologies. I've got three councillors, Banwaite, Bolton and Skelton. Are there any others? No? Okay, we'll record those then. Late items, there are none. Receipt of petitions, there are none. Identification of urgent items to which call-in will apply. Call-in will not apply to item 11, which is the council tax base for 2018-19, as there'll be plenty of opportunity to discuss that this time next week. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No, that's fine. Moving then to item 6, the minutes of the last meeting, which was the 6th of December. If we can just go through those, if there are any inaccuracies anybody wishes to raise, then please do so now. Otherwise, we'll take those as agreed, if everyone's happy with that. Yeah, okay, those minutes are agreed. Item 7, recommendations from the Executive Scrutiny Board. As normal, we'll take those as we go through the agenda relating to each item, so we'll cover those as we go. So we move then to key decisions, and item 8. The eagle-eyed of you may notice that items 8 and 9 are the wrong way round on some agendas. We will go first of all with item 8, which is the Derby City Council tenancy strategy, and that's Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. Our existing tenancy strategy was extended to end of 2017. And we delayed introducing the new strategy because the new regulations which have been announced as a result of 2016 Housing and Planning Act haven't actually been publicly made available, and they need to be incorporated in the new strategy. I'm suggesting that we actually further extend the existing strategy till the regulations are known, and so they can be incorporated in the new document. We haven't put a date on the new one because we just don't know when the new regulations will be made available. And I think the current strategy works really, well, quite in a satisfactory way, so there's no desperate need for us to introduce an interim one until we get the new regulation. So I recommend that we approve the recommendation which is listed under 2.1 and extend the existing strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. Are there any questions or comments on this item? Councillor Kerr.
Just for clarification, the recommendation says to extend the strategy on an open-ended basis. I presume that means unless there is some reason for reviewing it, because if something else that's not specifically mentioned there were to arise, or a number of little niggles or something else is not specific happened, I still think we should review it. So does an open-ended basis effectively mean that?
Yes, I think that's right, Councillor Kerr. I don't know if we're in the hands of central government to an extent, and if they make any changes, we may be forced to reflect those. But I don't know, Councillor Hussain, if you've got any further comment on that.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the vital bit. What are you suggesting, that we actually draw up a new one and then make any... No, sorry.
No, it's just the clarification of the phrase in the recommendation on an open-ended basis, which would suggest that it's ongoing until something happens. And it's suggested that the trigger might come from government. But if something were to happen locally, or there should be, I don't know, maybe a petition from tenants or a suggestion that it would be better if, you know, I think we just need to be flexible locally. And I'm hoping that this won't tie our hands in future. So that if it's sensible to do a review, we won't feel, you know, duty-bound to not do it. And I just wanted, therefore, clarification of this phrase on an open-ended basis, that it's not going to tie our hands in any way.
I take your point. I don't think actually it will do, because as and when the information is available to us, we should be able to make any alterations that we want to the existing strategy. But we can take advice from Olu, because in my opinion, it shouldn't really hinder our ability to make any changes.
I take the point that Councillor Kerr is making. Yes, we are a public body ultimately, and so if there are any case law or subsidiary legislation-based points which need to be factored into the strategy before the central government guidance comes out, we're duty-bound to take them on board.
Thank you. Hopefully that's cleared that up for you, Councillor Kerr. Yes, early on, Derby decided we'd reject the ability to introduce fixed-term tenancies, so I think it's worth making that point that this in no way changes that. We won't be wanting to pursue that for all sorts of reasons. So that's covered in the at 4.4 as well. The recommendations for scrutiny were just to note the report. So if there's no further comments or questions, can I ask Cabinet members to approve recommendation 2.1? Show. Thank you, that's approved. So we move to item 9, again Councillor Hussain, acquisition and purchase of larger properties for affordable housing.
As you can see from the details incorporated in the report before you, the waiting times for 5-bedroom properties are twice as long as smaller properties, 2 or 3-bedroom properties. So therefore, we do have an opportunity to acquire 4 or 5-bedroom houses. There is money available in the housing revenue account, and also it will give us the opportunity to use surplus capital receipts. So there is always a small risk that unless we spend the capital receipts in the prescribed way, they may have to be returned to the government. So because it's advantageous and we desperately need larger properties, I agree with the recommendations that we ought to give officers a go-ahead and advise them to start looking for larger properties. The total cost has been put at around about 800,000, which we can afford. So I suggest that we approve the recommendations listed from 2.1 to 2.5.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. I've got Councillor Holmes who's indicated.
Just to say, Chair, the Scrutiny Board supported this and commended officers for their work, because the officers relayed when the point was made about can we do more. The answer, of course, is yes, we can. However, it's very intensive in terms of officer time and the actual length of time it takes to actually turn these properties around and to be in a position where Cabinet are actually agreeing these acquisitions. And I think the Scrutiny Board and myself as well would say that any support we can give officers to increase those resources where we could to make more acquisitions, we should pursue it.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Got Councillor Russell and then Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to say that I fully support the recommendations as laid out by Councillor Hussain. This is a really important area. More and more families are struggling. More and more families are being made homeless. You only have to look round the streets of Derby to see the problem, and we are not alone in that. This is a national issue that requires national challenge. And it's not just 4 and 5 bedroom properties that are the issue. Of course they are, and this report seeks to address that issue specifically. But I think one of the things, perhaps, as Councillor Holmes was suggesting, that we could do more, I think absolutely, there's always more to be done. One of the things I would ask Councillor Holmes if he would be willing to do is to call on the government to lift the debt cap that is applied to local authorities in terms of building new properties, because that is a real stringent restriction on local authorities being able to house their populations adequately. We've got to do more on this, and it really needs some urgent attention nationally.
Yes, absolutely right, Councillor Russell, thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. I'm mindful that in the private sector, the shortage of larger houses is solved by people building extensions, and there are loads of extensions coming in to homes at the moment. And therefore, it's good to notice that there's a comment to the Scrutiny Board that Derby Homes is looking to convert properties and extend them. This might be a more cost-effective solution in terms of purchase, to purchase a 2 or 3 bedroom semi and extend it, which is what families are doing. And I would hope that if that is the best solution for the council, rather than to refurbish what is already a 4 or 5, which doesn't extend our housing capacity within the city, it might be more sensible to buy that 3-bedroom, which has scope for extension, and to build the extension. And whether that can be built into the recommendation, if officers find something that is a 3-bedroom but with scope for expansion, I don't know. I think it's up to you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain, come back on that one.
Councillor Kerr, I think it's not a case of one or the other. I think we ought to be pursuing both. Where we can afford, we ought to be purchasing new properties and increase the stock available to reduce the waiting times for families who are currently waiting around about 18 months before they're made an offer. But I do take your point in principle, where Derby Homes have indicated very clearly where it is possible for them to actually increase the size of the property by building an extension, that should be done. And I think we are actively pursuing that. But this is in addition to that. It's not in place of that. Those extensions will carry on and will be pursued in the same way.
Thank you. Councillor Repton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I welcome the proposals. I think that goes some way to start to resolve some of these issues. But as has been mentioned in early contributions, we do face a crisis in housing. In the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, it was generation buy. It's now generation rent. And people are struggling, young people, to get on the housing ladder with little or no hope. This hasn't been seriously addressed enough, and certainly I also welcome Councillor Holmes' intervention with regard to this particular problem, but I also welcome his intervention with regard to his colleagues nationally in terms of the crisis facing particularly older people and particularly vulnerable people in this country. And it's getting worse. It needs to be addressed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Repton. So we have a comment from the Executive Scrutiny Board to note the report. We have recommendations 2.1 through into 2.5. I think this is a really positive way forward, and as Councillor Hussain said, it's not just about purchasing new properties, it's also about supporting Derby Homes to extend existing ones, and I know that from casework in my own area that is happening. So this is really positive. It's supporting particularly larger families, and we do get an asset at the end of the day as well. So it's a win-win really. So with that in mind, recommendations 2.1 to 2.5. I'll ask Cabinet colleagues to show whether they approve those or not. Yep, that's agreed. Thank you very much. So we move then to item 10, compulsory acquisition of empty homes. I think this is covered in the exempt item later on, but if you'd just like to cover the first part, Councillor Hussain, please, before we come back to it at the confidential section.
The details of the properties which we intend to acquire under compulsory purchase order are in the pink papers. But in general, we've been running a campaign as an authority to bring empty properties back into use for a number of years, and we are nationally recognized in being quite successful in that particular aspect. So more or less at every cabinet meeting, I do bring a list of properties which have been lying empty for a number of months or years. And as a last resort, we actually issue compulsory purchase orders, and in many cases they bring about the result, because then it gets across to the owners the seriousness with which the council is taking this matter. And in many cases it prompts them to actually bring about the improvements themselves, But if they don't actually respond, then as a matter of course, we'll pursue the compulsory purchase order, do up the property, and make sure that it is brought back into use, or either to sell or give it to Derby Homes to manage on our behalf. And that strategy has actually delivered real results as far as we are concerned, because the number of properties which are now lying vacant has been coming down year on year in that sense. So yes, I recommend that we approve the recommendations which are listed from 2.1 to 2.2.2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Holmes.
So
first.
actually, sorry, the recommendations run on to 2.2.6. That's what I was just on.
Yes, they do. 2.2.6. Councillor Holmes, please.
Just a point, Chair, to say that this is an issue which I feel is very non-political in a way. Every administration, probably the last two administrations prior to your administration, had this as a priority moving forward, and I would very much hope any future administrations would continue the work that continues apace, and it's something which needs to be at the forefront of every administration's policy, and you know, we need to do again more to get empty homes back into use, because as Councillor Repton has said, we have a housing shortage, and this is part of that jigsaw.
Thank you. Yes, I was reading in I think one of the national newspapers not so long ago, there was some criticism that local authorities nationally aren't using their powers in this area enough. So it's really pleasing to note that Derby does, and we have done for over a long period. And as Councillor Hussain said, he very regularly brings these reports, and as a result, we've no doubt brought back into use hundreds of houses over a period of time that our residents can now benefit from. So all very positive. So as I say, we'll come back to the detail in the classified part of the report. But for now, if members are happy to approve those recommendations, noting the scrutiny board comments, which are just to note the report. If the Cabinet, please, are happy to take those recommendations. Yeah, that's agreed. Thank you. Moving then to item 11, Council tax base for 2018-19, and Councillor Shanker.
Thank you, Chair. The calculation of the council tax base for the city is a key stage in the budget setting process and will form the basis for the council tax charge for the council's taxpayers for 2018-19. The tax base has to be notified to the Police and Crime Commissioner for Derbyshire and Derbyshire Fire Authority by the 31st of January this year. So the recommendation is to approve the council tax base for the year at 67,610.42 Band D equivalent properties in accordance with current regulations, and the recommendation is to take this to full council on the 24th of this month.
Thank you. Councillor Shanker, any comments or questions on that? Fairly routine, we do it every year. So if there's no questions, Cabinets can show their approval or otherwise of those recommendations, please. Yep, that's agreed, thank you. And we'll return this time next week, no doubt, for further discussion on that one. So then we move to, again, sorry, I should have said scrutiny resolved to note the report, no comments, particularly from scrutiny on that. Item 12 then, this is commercial waste, proposed delegation of the service to Nottingham City Council, and Councillor Afzal.
Thank you, Chair. Working on this with Nottingham City Council supports the emerging metro strategy. The combined commercial waste service will be able to grow quickly and will deliver potentially significant financial benefits for both councils. We're expecting the service to grow fourfold within 2 or 3 years. Nottingham City have already a market share of around 22% in their city, while we currently only have a 3% share of the commercial waste business in Derby. The combined service will be able to compete with the private sector providers on a like-for-like basis and the agreement with Nottingham allows us to share any surplus income share. Cost savings will arise immediately with waste being disposed of through the Nottingham waste plant rather than largely going to landfill as it currently is. The arrangement with Nottingham will see a small number of staff, approximately 15, transfer, but the terms and conditions when working for Nottingham will be very similar to the current ones they have in Derby. Staff will continue to be based at Stores Road, Chair, and the service to customers is not expected to change significantly. So I move the recommendations as printed in the report 2.1 and 2.2, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Afzal. Councillor Holmes, please.
Thank you, Chair. There was a couple of comments quite a debate actually in scrutiny over this one. I think the debate was that it was an opportunity for both parties, and it was something which dipping your toe in the water, if you like, in terms of joint working and what that might bring in the future for the benefit of both cities and both councils. There was a point actually made by one of my colleagues in regards to when the changes come in, whatever the company or whatever the service, if you like, the name of it, it will change apparently direct debits for businesses, and so there needs to be a decent lead time for that to obviously change and people be aware of that it is going to change, so that there's no hiccups in that area. And we did have assurances from officers too that, as has been said, that TUPE would be applied to those staff that are transferring to the new service, and their conditions would be protected. The point I made, I mean, I've been TUPE twice, from public to private, private to public. This is public to public, so the conditions probably are very in parity anyway, so I wouldn't have thought there's many condition changes regarding Derby and Nottingham councils. But they were the overall comments of the executive scrutiny board. So as long as they are sort of taken on board by the Cabinet, then I don't think the Conservatives have any issue with this, and we'll be looking closer to see how it progresses.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Councillor Kerr.
This is one of those services sort of on the cusp between best done by the public sector and effectively done by the private sector. I don't know whether there's a difference between Derby and Nottingham in terms of the private sector offer that is already here in Derby, and I don't know whether that was looked at in comparison to Nottingham. That if Nottingham are already taking nearly a quarter of the commercial waste, it would suggest that the private sector there isn't as well developed as it is here. So are we expecting to achieve that 15-20% growth in market share, or have we looked at the current offer so that we're not expecting that degree of growth, at least in the short term? Has that been looked at as part of this process?
Yes, Christine.
As part of this, obviously we've worked closely with Nottingham. They've got their experience of having grown their market over the last few years, and certainly their very strong advice is that there is market growth there that a new service could take up. There's also differences in the way in which they would simply operate the service. They have an infrastructure of IT and a back office that is geared up to doing this in a way that we're not currently. So a lot of this was about saying how much more quickly we could get to a position of being more competitive by working with Nottingham rather than doing something on our own. But I think there is a general view that the market is there. We just need to have a slightly different approach in the way we look at it.
Okay, any further questions or comments? We will return to this as item 19 in the confidential papers, so we'll have a further discussion at that point. The recommendations from scrutiny are to consider the report under more detailed exempt item at item 19, so there'll be some comments from scrutiny at that point. So for the time being, can I ask Cabinet then to approve recommendations 2.1 and 2.2? Yep, that's agreed, thank you. Item 13 then is the Council budget proposals for 2018-19, and Councillor Shanker.
Thank you again, Chair. The report before you today provides information on the Council's finances. It summarises the revenue budget, the demand and cost pressures on the Council and the savings to be delivered, and provides a balanced budget. It sets the planned capital programme, including such key projects as the new swimming pool and the way these will be funded. It also summarises the Treasury management position of the Council, its debt and investment position and cash flow implications over the next few years. The report also covers the HRA and DSG spending plans, as well as a summary of the results of the budget consultation and the changes the Cabinet is seeking to make following this feedback. In short, it is a comprehensive estimate of the Council's finances, covering all elements of its operations. More importantly, it provides a balanced financial plan without the need to use reserves or additional borrowing in the short term to allow the Council to take the lead in the future development and growth of our city. Council will therefore be asked next week to consider these budget proposals, and I therefore recommend Cabinet to submit the report to Council. I also welcome information from last night's scrutiny meeting where, despite several conversations, there was no further recommendations or changes proposed, and the scrutiny board has noted the report.
Thank you. Councillor Shanker, any questions or comments on that? No, we'll save that for next week. The recommendations then, 2.1 to 2.8, for Council Cabinet to refer this to the meeting of full Council next week. As Councillor Shanker says, scrutiny have resolved to note the report. All those in favour, please. Okay, that's agreed. Thank you. Moving then to item 14, contract and financial matters. Councillor Shanker.
Thank you again, Chair. There's a summary at 1.1 and recommendations 2.1 through to 2.7, a routine report which tidies up financial matters in between Cabinet meetings.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Shanker. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. One item to note on this, which was quite an interesting discussion last night at scrutiny with regards to the JAQU funding for the early measures of the Clean Air Support Project. Christine was involved in that discussion, and what we were saying was that there might be some joined up working here. Councillor Shanker and maybe some others will be aware that there's discussions ongoing about the taxi fleet within the city and the age of vehicles. And of course that is going to come into play when we talk about clean air zones. And whether there is some funding available or if that issue should be considered in the round with regards to considering funding and the implementation of clean air zone, for example. There was indications that that would be the case, but I think it's important there to actually join things up, because we're having one discussion within the licensing process, all the members are who are involved in that, and yet there's obviously another discussion which dips into that and can be, we can make sure that it's joined up and make sure we get the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Yes, there's, I know there is a great deal of work going on in terms of drawing up proposals for the clean air zone, and as you say, taxis will be a key part of that. So we will be looking as to what support we can give to help transition to a much more environmentally friendly fleet. Obviously issues for public transport as well, and heavy goods vehicles, so it's a wider issue that we, as you say, we need to look at in the round. So any other comments or questions then on item 14? No. The comments from scrutiny were that they made no recommendations on this item, however requested that officers communicate further work on the clean air zone bid to a future meeting of a licensing committee to enable joined up working, and I'm sure we'll facilitate that. So accepting that, that recommendation from scrutiny, everyone happy to approve the recommendations 2.1 to 2.7? Yep, lovely, that's agreed. So we move then to item 15, the creation of the role of the Derby Ambassador for Business and Innovation. And I'll hand over to Christine Durant for this one.
Obviously, it's self-explanatory within the report, but I think the Chief Executive is very keen that we always are looking for new ways to promote Derby, and there seems to be an increasing use of people within the private sector to help to move forward the whole process of looking for business growth and innovation and increased investment within the city. In the report, there's a mention of a couple of ways in which the West Midlands and also Nottingham make use of significant people within their areas. And so in order to try to modernise the way in which we do things, we think it's appropriate to create this role of a Derby Ambassador for Business and Innovation. It's a new opportunity which we think we should be progressing. We obviously don't know exactly how it will work, and we'll be working with the individual to move that forward. But the report goes on to propose that we ask Mr Mel Morris from Derby County Football Club chairman to take on that role, and that will be subject to, obviously, Cabinet's approval would be going on to full council. There have been some discussions with other party leaders. We're very keen that this doesn't become a political issue, but this is about promoting Derby and the opportunities that Derby has to grow. So the recommendations are before you. That's the basis of the proposal.
Thank you very much. Councillor Repton first, then, please.
Yes, I think this is an excellent proposal, Chair, and I think if it's approved, it will ensure that we get into the Premier League of top cities in this country, as well as the Premiership of the Football League. Thank you, Chair.
Hear, hear, Councillor Repton. Councillor Kerr, please.
I feel this has the potential to be really interesting, but I think it'll depend on, in part, in how widely it's embraced as a concept. And I think it's something that needs to be the outreach through the business sector, through the voluntary sector, and in some ways a welcoming and a broadening of Mr Morris's understanding of the city from these different angles. He obviously is very well embedded in it anyway, but you can always learn more and to be able to understand those. So if he's got the time to do that, I think it'd be really good if he was invited to do that thing, a bit like being a mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. As Christian has said, I think this role is exciting. We'll see how it progresses over the next 3 years. And my view is that Mr Mel Morris is the perfect person for that particular role. Like I say, the discussions I've had of leader of the Conservative group is that this will be approached in a non-political manner. And I think that's right. We need this person to be independent of all that nonsense sometimes, and they can carry out the job that we're asking them to do, all being well, and it will result in benefits for everybody in the city. I'd just like to say that the recommendations from the Scrutiny Commission, they sound a little bit negative. I was there, and the board did not, I wouldn't say concerns so much as there was a debate about the process and you know, how it came about and that kind of thing. But it wasn't I didn't see it was a concern of the Scrutiny Board, so obviously I just want to make sure that it's all positive. There wasn't any negativity coming from the Scrutiny Board in terms of this this person joining us.
That's good to hear, thank you, Councillor Holmes. So are there any other questions or comments on this one? Again, it's referring on to full council for a final decision, which will be next week. Scrutiny Board resolved to request involvement in the appointment process in this type of role in future, and I'm sure we can accept that and incorporate that into the process going forward. So, accepting that, can I ask Cabinet members to then approve the recommendations to take this forward to full council and endorsing Mr Mel Morris as the to the role of the Derby Ambassador for Business and Innovation? Yep, that's agreed, thank you. So we come then to item 16, which is the exclusion of press and public. I'm very sorry, but we're going to have to lose our colleagues from the press and members of public at this point. So can I just ask Cabinet to formally approve that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act? That's agreed, thank you.